Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
Modern thinkers about God as it applies to our davening. We started talking about Rav Soleveitchik, who we will be doing for a few weeks. I'm going to go back to the first passage of Rav Soleveitchik, which we read, and read some of it a little more deeply. Again, Rav Yosef Dov Ber Soleveitchik, who is the scion, S-C-I-O-N, of what's called the Brisker lineage, and the predominant thinker and halachic authority of modern Orthodoxy in the second half of the 20th century, lived in Brookline, Mass., taught at Yeshiva University, and he was an existentialist. And that's kind of the stuff we're going to be reading today. Today we're going to read, as we did last time, mostly not about God, mostly about humans. But we will get to God, I promise. But it does relate directly to the Siddur. So just to take you back and not reread stuff that we read, Rav Soleveitchik says in the Amidah, which is the core prayer, called in Judaism Hatfilah, the prayer, because it's the core prayer. In the Amidah, as we know, there are three sections: the opening three blessings of praise, then the middle 13 of petition, the last three of gratitude. And he says that this basically comes from three fundamentally different stances we have towards God. The first and the third we'll talk about in the future. He has passages about that, and he has a Latin term for it, which I don't remember. We won't look at it this week. But, Heschel's kind of radical amazement, although he doesn't use that phrase, but that's what gives rise to the first section of praise. Recognizing God's radical compassion. That's what gives rise to the third part, which is the thank yous. Okay. And so he's now focusing a lot, and what we're going to focus on more, which we did last time and this time, is on the middle part, which he says emerges from the human individual's fundamental sense of isolation and aloneness. He actually thinks of this as tragic isolation. Each one of us, our lives are a tragedy. And so we'll read how he explores that. And he says, in terms of petition, asking for things, we have general suffering and specific suffering, or common suffering and specific suffering. Common suffering is there's someone close to me who's sick and I want for them to get well. So I say, I add their name in the Rafa'enu. That's common because lots of people get sick. Okay? Or Birkat Hashanim, which is basically asking God for good, crops. It boils down to good economy. I hope I have enough money to feed my family. Lots of people worry about having enough money to feed their family. He does not discount that suffering or that appeal to God, but he does say, well, okay, but there's nothing unique to you about that. Okay? He says, but then there's a deeper suffering, which is unique to you. And that's the whole existentialist thing that he gets into. And that's what we're going to read about today. First, I just want to pause to say, before we read that, again, we read some of it last time. We're going to read more deeply into it. But before I get to that, are there any questions about how I teed it up? Michael.
I just wanted to, something that I was thinking about the last time or two that we were together.
Yeah.
And that is that the structure of the Amidah that you laid out, I don't know whether it's something that is innate in us or whether it's learned very early, but from the almost earliest time that a child can talk, they're already employing that structure in dealing with their parents. They butter up their parents, that they beg for something, and then when they finally get it, thank you, thank you.
Correct. And you say that because we're modern and psychologically minded, so we think of parenting. The Talmud says it's how you approach a king, right? Because God is conceived of as a sovereign. It's how you approach a sovereign. You don't say, please, can you get that bad guy to give me back my field? I don't have what do you, it may just resonate with some leaders in our country today. I don't know, right? The same idea. It's like, oh, you got to do a lot of flattery, okay? And then you ask for what you need, and then there's a lot of gratitude, okay?
What I was getting at, though,
Yes.
is that kids seem to pick that up really
Yes.
early. It's almost as if it's innate.
Yes. So stipulated. All right. Let me share. And this is the text we read last time, but I'm sort of going to, I got to the existentialist stuff and I kind of speeded up because we had to finish up. So I am going to read it a little more slowly. Right. And he says this emerges from his Hebrew word tsara, like tsaris, right? Suffering. And he says there's the external objective and personal suffering and the existential personal suffering, which is his way of saying what I just said 5 minutes ago. Okay? And he talks about, illness, poverty. Yeah. Everyone has these things. Okay? And it's communal, and many people share this with you. Okay? Oi, your person is sick, you're praying for them. My person is sick, I'm praying for them. So a lot of these things are not, a lot of those, I'm going to call them common needs, are not, and this is very key for him as an existentialist, they're not isolating. When the economy is bad, you're a farmer, you're praying for crops, or you're looking for jobs, the economy is bad. The economy is bad for a lot of people. So what you're praying for, a lot of people are praying for. Or the downfall of the bad guys, right? A lot of us are thinking of the same bad guys. We're praying for the same downfall, same bad. We're all in that boat together. It's not an isolating experience. It's actually a communal experience, says Soloveichik. It kind of draws you closer to other people. The deeper suffering, though, is a fundamentally isolating suffering, and that's a very important distinction for him. Okay, and here's where I'm going to start with it. On page 31, we're underlined. Oh, sorry, Michael is all right. There's a little bit bigger. Okay, big enough for you people. All right,
Much better.
This crisis, which is the human crisis of existence, is encountered in the strangeness of human destiny, of which the person is not aware at all unless they are willing to acquaint themselves with it. Meaning, you could be totally unaware of this if you choose to not think about it or experience it. This type of crisis is searched out and discovered by the person and accepted by them freely. I recognize and accept my state of crisis. Okay. Top of the next page. Man, the individual, is not thrown into this kind of crisis. If there's sickness that I'm praying about, I'm just thrown into that crisis. Okay? But this kind of crisis, I'm not thrown into it. I find it within myself. And now big words, which I'll read them for the sake of completeness, but I don't think it may not illuminate things. It may or may not illuminate things for you. It is not of natural, social, economic, or environmental, but instead of existential, metaphysical origin. It's not because the rain came through my roof. It's because of something in me. Human existence exhausts itself in the experience of crisis, in the continual discovering of oneself in distress. He said this Hebrew word for distress is tsara. In the steady awareness of coming closer and closer to the brink of utter despair, the paradoxical concept of being born out of nothingness and running down to nothingness. Right? This is Pirkei Avot. Contemplate. You come from a stinking drop and you go back to the worms. Okay? That's all of human existence. Okay? and then he uses fancy word, antik. I don't know what that means. I am, we don't say I am in distress. And Judaism wants you, the person, the individual, to discover the tragic element of their existence, to place yourself voluntarily in distressing narrowness, right? You recognize how would we say narrowness nowadays, modern times? The word related to tzara, Mitzrayim, okay? You recognize your Mitzrayim. You explicate and bring it to the fore the deep-seated crisis in my very existence. Surely, humanity must fight courageously against the extraneous surface crisis. Yeah, of course, we're supposed to heal illness. Larry, could you put your hand down, or at least leave it up, but you're going to have to wait a while, okay? Yeah. You're supposed to fight against poverty and disease and make the environment better and get rid of the bad guys and vote for the good guys. Yeah. Of course. So it's not like you're not supposed to do that, okay? But now here's where he talks about a distinction between the Jewish existentialist view and other existentialism. And because I didn't take Philosophy 101, I don't know that much about about regular existentialism. But he talks about the distinction. The second paragraph, bottom paragraph, page 32, the distinction between the attitude of modern existentialism and the Judaic view of the depth crisis is that Judaism advocates distress without anguish. I have no idea what that means. How could you have distress without anguish? Indeed, one must combat the external thing, blah, blah, blah. Skipping a sentence. With respect to the inner crisis, however, which is rooted in depth experience, means it's rooted in me, the human was told not only that we should not try to disengage ourselves from our involvement in it, but on the contrary, that we should deepen and accept it. We're supposed to accept our individual crisis, okay? Because it yields to, this last sentence, a process of growth in the experience of crisis. When he says anguish, I think he means getting depressed. That's what I'm going to translate into. Meaning, don't get depressed about this existential aloneness. It is a road or a path to growth. Voluntarily getting in touch with that and recognizing it is a road to growth. Top of the page 33, the starred paragraph. The existential experience is not shared by the thou, which means whoever your thou is, your loved one, your best friend, your significant other, life partner, not shared with that person, however close they are to the I, since it is an integral part of the existential awareness, which is singular, and hence inexpressible in the universal terms through which we communicate our standardized experiences. No one but the sufferer themselves is involved in this deeply human anguish and conflict. No one else but me gets it. Maybe my therapist, if they've known me a long time. It is the sufferer whose awareness oscillates between bliss and pain. In the great, as a hard half a sentence, in the great negation of the finite that rises out of its confrontation by the infinite. Neither spouse, nor child, nor parent, nor therapist may understand and sympathize with the lonely individual when their existential experience is at a low ebb, when trials, doubts, and inhibitions abound. I think the trials, doubts, and inhibitions is, what's the point of life and what is my life about? The prayer echoing from the depth crisis of a questing soul emerges from seclusion, from out of the loneliness of the individual whom everyone save God has abandoned. Psalm 27, this is familiar enough to us. Ki avi ve'imi azavuni, varonai asfeni. Right? Even my parents, even those closest to me, may abandon me, but God takes me in. The psalmist speaks of such suffering, the situation of the afflicted person overwhelmed by their pain, who pours out their complaint before the Lord. And then he goes on to some story metaphors here. Why is that? Why are we extraordinarily lonely? Because we understand, if we choose to understand, one unalterably cruel reality. It is that you never emerge victorious from combat. Total triumph is not your destiny. And we said, who is his biblical metaphor, who we're going to read about in a couple of weeks? Who does not emerge totally victorious from combat?
Jacob.
But he survives with a limp. Oh, he quotes another thing from Breshit. Thorns and thistles. What do you get from all your, whatever a human may plant, end of page 33, top of 34, you reap thorns. Thorns and thistles shall the earth bring forth to you, and you will eat of the herb of the field. Right? This is the human destiny, is what he is saying. Why? Why so glum, Rav Soleveitchik? He tells you why so glum. The reason for the individual's failure lies in the discrepancy between their creative fantasy and, okay, I'm going to slow down. The discrepancy between each of us as an individual, our creative fantasy, and the objective means of self-fulfillment that are at our disposal. While our boundless fantasy expresses itself in accents of endless desire and vast activity, I'll become the bank president, be impossibly handsome and have tens of thousands of followers on Instagram. Okay, this is what I desire. The tools with which I try to accomplish my goals are limited, since they belong to the finite order of things and forces. I think this is an important sentence. The human individual desires infinity itself. Yes, must be satisfied with a restricted, bounded existence. When I reach out, I anticipate the endless and boundless, enrapturing myself with the vision of unlimited opportunities. Oh, I forgot to add, besides all the Instagram followers and bank president and impossibly handsome, and I want to live forever. Just think of our tech titans, right? I want to be the richest person in the world and chase all of these pseudo-science things that they do because, life can be sustained forever. And yet, at the hour of achievement, the thoughtful human, is what Soloveichik would say, finds themselves hemmed in by finitude. The anticipation and the realization lie in different dimensions. Man always loses the final battle. And of course, the final battle is death, right? You're always destined to lose. Every individual is always destined to lose. And then he has his paragraph about Jacob, right? Limping, right? But you live, right? You live with blessing. This, top of the next page, this strange scene of Jacob wrestling with the angel is restaged in everyone's life. Your life, either your whole life, or just your life is that scene over and over again. For the human is always in need. Okay, now let's link it to prayer, the Siddur. When the individual is in need and prays, Hashem listens. One of God's attitudes is Shomei Tfilah, the one who hears prayer. Now, what is God doing when we're davening? Here's what Soloveichik, because I said every modern thinker is in one way or another responding to Mordechai Kaplan, who said, you're just whistling in the dark. There's nothing out there. For Soloveichik, there is something out there. However, let us note that Judaism has never promised that God accepts all prayer. The efficacy of prayer is not the efficacy of prayer, which means your prayer being answered is not the main point of avodah shebalev, worship from the heart. We remember he introduced that concept last time what we read. Acceptance of prayer, meaning that God will accept my prayer, is a hope, a vision, a wish, a petition, but it is not its principle or premise, which means, I just need to restate that, the fact that you are asking for something in your middle 13 brachot is not the main point of why you are saying those brachot. Yeah, you have the wish that it'll be answered, but that's not the premise. The foundation of prayer is not the conviction of its effectiveness. I'm going to say it again. The foundation of prayer is not the conviction of its effectiveness. Hashem will listen to me and heal the sick person. That is not the foundation of prayer. But rather the belief that through it we approach God intimately, and the miraculous community embracing finite little me and my Creator is born. I have created community, which means I started out feeling alone in my existential crisis, but now I realize I'm not alone. The basic function of prayer is not its practical consequences, but the metaphysical formation of a fellowship consisting of God and man. So when Soleveitchik says fellowship consisting of God and man, he sounds like who we read? What other modern thinker? Heschel. This sounds exactly like Heschel. Okay? The individual is always in need because you're always in crisis and distress. There's a disapproval of yourself, dissatisfied with yourself, you don't have faith in yourself. He goes on and on, back to okay. Again, by the way, back to Pirkei Avot at the bottom of page 35. The individual feels the paradox involved in an existence which has been imposed on me in an unexplained way and which finally betrays and deserts me in the same absurd manner. Against your will you were born, against your will do you live, and against your will do you die. Pirkei Avot. So he looks at these nice, air quote, simple, pithy sayings from Pirkei Avot from close to 2,000 years ago, and saying, here is expressed the core of the individual's existential crisis. Even the simplest, that is to say, he has a PhD in philosophy, and he's saying, even if you don't have a PhD in philosophy, any person can perceive and comprehend this existential, tragic aspect of the individual. So what he is doing is he is sketching out, this is he calls it existentialism, which is you are fundamentally alone in your tragic existence. You come from a stinking drop and you go back to worm food, or against your will you're born, against your will you live and parentheses and suffer, against your will you die. Okay? Everyone has fantasies. They're going to win the race, and everyone ends up limping. If you're blessed, you limp, but you have a blessing. But that's the best you can do. That's the fundamental condition. Now, he says that the difference between regular existentialism, which I don't really know what it is, and Jewish existentialism is that in Jewish existentialism, you embrace that. You embrace that, you explore that, you don't avoid it. The thoughtful person delves into it. His last sentence, even a simpleton, you don't have to be college educated to understand it, that you're fundamentally alone in the universe in a way that your closest loved ones cannot comprehend. By the way, and they have this fundamental aloneness also. By the way, and I'm not going to ask by show of hands, right? Because I think all the hands would go up. Like, in your life, have you ever felt this? I am fundamentally alone in my existence. No one fully gets it. No one fully gets me. You can add other questions. Why am I here? What's the point? Et cetera, et cetera. He says, don't let that descend into anguish, which I'll translate into major depressive episode, my psychiatric terms. It's not cause for depression. This is our condition, but middle section of the Amida, you're not alone. You do have a companion. And this is where his existentialism shades into, by the way, it's Heschel, it's also Rav Kook. Remember Rav Kook, who said that it's about opening, as Rav Kook and also the other Hasidic guy, we did the Piazetzner. It's waking up your soul, which is slumbering, so that your soul reconnects with God. Rav Kook was an optimist, and he said this process is inescapable, right? It's inescapable. It's an inescapable metaphysical process, that spiritual process, that your soul longs to reconnect with God. Rav Kook says it in a Hasidic way, and Rav Soleveitchik says it in an existentialist way. Notice they're both moderns in the sense that they're responding to Kaplan, I think, inexplicitly, implicitly. Kaplan said, your prayers aren't going to get heard because we know what causes cancer. God doesn't cause cancer. God doesn't heal cancer. And they're avoiding the question of, does God cause cancer, or does God heal cancer, or does God choose to listen to prayer or not? They're avoiding that question. I'm not saying this is a criticism, okay? They're sweeping that question aside, and they're saying that's not the point of prayer. The point of prayer, and again, I think this is where they are all modern in the sense that they are, Michael, shh, don't whisper, I want you to hear this. They're all modern in the sense that they focus on the emotional, psychological, and spiritual needs of the individual. That is a fundamentally modern approach to life, right? 500 years ago, all that mattered was that I was part of a family and I was part of my group. That was my standing. Of course, I guess it might have mattered that I was an individual, but philosophically, it didn't matter, okay? And in modernity, philosophically, this is the thing that matters the most, right? That I am not like you and you are not like me. So for Rav Kook, and I think some of them I think they're saying similar things, different vocabulary. For Rav Kook, it's my soul is reconnecting to the divine soul. All souls can be reconnected. The Piazetzner said it's because you're asleep. Your soul is asleep that you don't do that. Wake up. That's what davening is for, as well as meditation, right? And singing and humming verses from Psalms, Nigunim over and over again. Wake up the soul, okay? Because it's isolated, because you leave it isolated, because you're sleepwalking through life, said the Piazetzner in Warsaw, a modern city in the 20s and 30s, okay? And Heschel's version is whatever, God in search of man. Heschel also has the other side. God is lonely and wants to connect with us. But our relationship to God is fundamentally about connection. Okay? And Soloveichik is saying, because if you really contemplate what your life is all about, dude and dudette, you will realize how fundamentally alone you are. But you're not. Okay? Because the Amida puts you in fellowship with God. You're not alone. God is the only thou who understands what your I is about. He's using Buber, I, thou terms there. Okay? I just want to say a personal note, and then I will allow only 5 minutes of questions and discussion. My personal note, this is just personal, my own davening and my own explorations of davening, my last few weeks to months. I'm working on 2 things. The other one is Atah, but I won't get into that now. But the one that applies to this is I am interpreting Ahava, all this God, Ahava, Rabav, Tanu, we are supposed to love, as connection, right? Rather than English translation, love. Connection as opposed to disconnection. And I can go into that, whatever, in a private conversation. Okay, so for all these thinkers, it's about connection, right? Because Kaplan said, there's nothing out there. You're just whistling in the dark. You're expressing your highest aspirations. And Rav Kook and Heschel and Soleveitchik all say, yeah, there is something, and I am connecting myself to it through prayer. Even though superficially the words are, I'm asking for a raise. Uh-huh. But there's a deeper need. And that's really what it's about. That's where That's what Soloveichik. I don't want to say he disagrees with Heschel or Rav Kook. I just want to say he digs deeper because he's an existentialist into this. What is the human experience? He digs more deeply into that. Now it's only 4 minutes. Larry, then Carl.
Many years ago I read Halachic Man, and I had the same feeling I had whenever I read Aviva Zornberg. I know I'm only understanding 10% of what he's writing, but that 10% is pretty good.
Heschel too. That's why we go and reread. Yes, right.
Yeah, Avi, you got to write the book. So you got to write the book.
You are the second person this week who said that to me.
Well, I've said this before.
Yeah.
A couple of comments.
Okay.
I think I get at least the beginning part of it. And for me, it's wrapped up in a number of prayers. And you said there's one is Tachanan. When I say aloud, Sarli Ma'od, I mean, I got to go back and read this, but that's what Soleveitchik is capturing, or I'm capturing. I don't think he influenced me. Yeah. My Sarli Ma'od is not that I'm distressed about my personal situation. It's just my personal, I can't even describe it, but it's something more than being distressed about a particular issue.
Yeah.
Or the Ma'anachnu in Pesukim de Zimra.
The early mini Tachnun in Birchot HaShachar, right? The preface. Yeah. Yes.
And two more quick things. A lot of this in terms of the davening, and it kind of captures what I think I'm doing, is wrapped up in a line from a Harry Chapin song. It's got to be the going, not the getting there, that's good. My davening is the going. It's not the getting there. It's not the answer.
Right. Well, I want to add to that because Soloveichik says you won't get there.
Yeah.
He says fundamentally recognize you won't actually get there. By the way, I think the Jacob Yaakov Avinu metaphor really does capture it. Like if you have a good life, you have blessings and you're limping. It's inevitable that you'll be limping. Okay. And the most you hope for is that you get a blessing while you've got
to deal with that in your life.
Correct. Good. By the way, I just want to add comment, and then I'm going to stop you because I want to get to Carl. I want to let someone else, share their thoughts or questions. I just want to point out in Tachnun, we physically enact that the head down. I'm down. Okay. I'm not limping. It's a different kind of physical enactment of that emotional, psychological, he would say, existential state. Okay, Carl. Thank you, Larry. Carl.
Hi, where to begin? So much to say about this. I think it's a great philosophy for people who are frequently despairing, depressed, overcome with the difficulty of life and the inability to accomplish significant things. Maybe it gives them a little solace or a little way to mitigate that. But I think it's a terrible philosophy for the majority of people who are a modicum of success in their life, have a personality that is most of the time contented, optimistic, and appreciating their modest accomplishments. And to tell them to dwell more frequently and more deeply on the despair of the imperfection of the human condition is unhelpful and, in fact, harmful. So I'll be quiet because you only want us to take 5 minutes in total.
Yeah. So
this is bad stuff.
I got it. So here's what I want to say. Number one, I put before you in this class various views, and you will find some of them appealing and some of them not appealing. So thank you, Carl. Great for that statement of this does not work for me and for a lot of other people.
How can his whole movement be based on this? They're not all depressed and despairing.
He's not. That's not his movement. His movement is you should daven 3 times a day. You should wear talis and tefillin. You should keep all the mitzvahs. He's an Orthodox rabbi. Talmud. He's a Talmud teacher. He is saying here like I think he's saying, just to respond to you, Carl, he's saying, what's this middle part of the davening about, the Amida? Is it because I think God is a Pez dispenser? And,
that part's okay. Telling us it's to get us connected, not to satisfy us.
Okay.
Everyone should despair of their human condition part.
Well, I want to argue with you a little, by the way. By the way, accept that you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. But just to argue on his behalf, he would say, because that cheerfulness and self-satisfaction only goes so deep, because Jacob always thinks he's going to have more sheep than anyone else and more wives and children than anyone else. But in the end, the guy is limping to the finish line. He's lame.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean dead, which doesn't mean worthless, useless. He still, by the way, still has a lot of sheep and a lot of wives and children. Okay. But it's not an unalloyed success. That's all he's saying. But I got it. I get what you're saying. Okay. You're saying, sorry, he's too much of a Danny Downer. Okay. I got to go. I'm going to let that stand. God willing. By the way, Carl, I'm sorry. I have more Soleveitchik in the weeks ahead, but we've gotten through, I want to say we have gotten through the passage. We've gotten through the depths. Okay. So we're not going to go back over that. Next week, we are going to talk about the first and third parts of the Amida. Now we fully have plumbed the existential depths. So we'll mention it again, but we're not going to read that passage again. Okay. Thanks for playing. Everyone stay healthy. Be Torah.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.